With all the hype swirling around Lolly and Moeka, it's easy to forget about Lan Yan, who'll be releasing in the same patch as them. So today, I wanted to shine a little spotlight on her as we discuss what her potential kit may end up looking like, and talk about what teams she may work in based on these speculations. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So first off, we gotta lay the groundwork for what her abilities might end up looking like. I'm going to make the assumption of an Anemo Shielder because we haven't gotten any of those before. Whatever key things could she get that'd make her worth using? Well, obviously the shield has to be good for starters. She'd end up competing with Layla, another 4-star shielder, who is already perfectly sufficient at what she does. In fact, Layla's shield ends up being pretty impressive if you put the work into beefing it up, so Lan Yan has to have some kind of gimmick or insane scaling that allows her shield to surpass or at least be on the same level as her direct competitors. Secondly, just shielding isn't enough. There's gotta be some buffing or another kind of gimmick going on here. I'm not expecting much out of her honestly, since she will probably end up as a free Lantern Rite unit. That event typically only takes place during the X.4 patches, but because 5.4 will only be out in the latter half of February, I expect Lantern Rite to be in 5.3, especially because we always get at least one new Liyue character minimum during that time. However, there's also the famed Liyue bias, and Ga Ming ended up being genuinely insane for a 4-star. That guy was practically built for that year's Lantern Rite, so it could go both ways. Either being mid because she's technically going to be free on release, or good because she's from Liyue. Something interesting that she could do in place of buffing would be gripping, something like a mini Kazuha with defensive capabilities. As an Anemo, I expect her to carry the 4VV torch the same way that all of her other support predecessors did, so she'll have quite a lot of overall utility if she ends up shielding, grouping, and having the ability to proc that set. Plus, if we assume that she follows in Chaska's footsteps, aka having infusion-based mechanics, I can see her having something to do with them, whether that be absorbing certain elements to make her shield stronger against that specific element, or dishing out some form of damage based on what she absorbs. Just a guess based on what Chaska introduced to the Anemo niche. I wouldn't be surprised if Hoyo wanted to get a little experimental. A 4-star is a great place to do that. That's all under the assumption that she actually ends up being a shielder. Nothing set in stone right now, we're just speculating here, but I'd say that since we're 5 years into the game's life cycle, an Anemo Shielder is long overdue at this stage. Come on, Hoyoverse, make a Hydro Claymore next. I believe in you. Okay, so we've built up an image of a unit that could potentially end up shielding, grouping, holding 4VV, and maybe having some absorption-based mechanics if Chaska was paving the road for anything. We gotta talk about where she could work with all of this. She'll definitely be replacing Lynette. The cat is pretty decent, even down at C0 when you claim her as a free 4-star. However, I'm making the assumption that a C0 Lan Yan is able to provide everything that she does on top of shielding. I can see this being quite the stonks moment for aggravate teams. Hear me out. This isn't really an issue for Chloriander as she self-sustains, but it matters for the likes of Miko and Kaching, unless you're facing interruption resistance issues with your Chloriander, which happens to be a pretty realistic scenario as well. In aggro teams, Nahida will always be your best highest damaging Dendro support option, right? And Baiju, while he still provides you with quite good performance, isn't really a super commonly owned unit. Maybe a small percentage of the entire player base has a copy of him. So you have to sacrifice some of Nahida's damage in EM to stick her on a prototype Amber unless you're insanely good at the game and can dodge like a madman. Otherwise, your teams will typically lack sustenance, assuming that you've slapped Kazuha, Sucrose, or Lynette on the end. If you're struggling to survive under all of those conditions and iframing isn't enough for you, then Lan Yan would end up being a fantastic way to get the best of both worlds. You could use Nahida on a proper weapon, while also having an excellent shielder in Lan Yan to prevent you from taking too much damage or constantly getting staggered. And considering the high amount of hard-hitting enemies in the Abyss, such as the constipated beasts, Lan Yan will prove to be pretty useful as you don't have to sacrifice all of your damage. Sure, it'll be weaker than running Kazuha or Sucrose, but it'll be much better than losing Nahida. It's like the reverse of 4-piece instructor's Kirara. She allows the comfortable use of Kazuha, whereas Lan Yan will allow for the comfortable use of Nahida. Pick your vegetables wisely. The only situation in which you won't feel discomfort is when you're up against Rift Hounds. And it's pretty realistic that you'd use an aggravate team to challenge them considering the electric ones. However, they aren't in Abyss 24/7 and they shouldn't be a complete deterrent which steers you away from building Lan Yan at all. So, Kaching and Yai mains, you might end up landing yourselves quite the win here. Also, if there's any way that she can briefly deal some electro-infused damage while she's on field, you might be able to snatch up a few extra official A4 procs. Chloriander mains aren't gonna need her as much since she's already able to take care of herself sustain-wise. Even so, if you'd like some extra comfort on top of that which can prevent staggering, then fair enough. As for other teams, she would end up being pretty much fine anywhere. We all know that 4VV equals being a borderline everyman unit. I don't think she's gonna end up doing anything in particular for the Notlan cast. The difficult thing is that, hypothetically, let's say that Sitlolly ends up being a shielder too. Why would you end up using Lan Yan if you end up getting Sitlolly? Well, I suppose that's entirely going to depend on what Sitlolly ends up doing. I do think that this won't be as bad of a case as when they put Sethos on Clorox's banner, because being able to use 4VV already makes her quite the everyman already. Sure, we haven't got a kit yet, but she's confirmed to be an Animo character, plus she's a 4-star. Her being a 4VV user is pretty obvious, I would say, whereas Sitlolly is most likely going to be more of a Notlan-specific support. Yet still, it's interesting food for thought. Does this mean that Lan Yan's gonna end up being useless or useful? After all, the Notlan era of Genshin has proven to be pretty good to its 4-star characters, and the 4-stars it released during Fontaine's time weren't exactly pushovers either. Well, I think that if my assumptions and speculations are correct, she will end up being a decent unit. Not just okay, but not good either. Specifically in between that. Decent. She'd do enough to carve out her own identity within the Animo niche while serving as a good 4-star option for people who don't have particularly large rosters yet. She will probably end up serving Aggravate mains quite nicely, while still being a pretty solid everyman unit that might not exactly be the best option, but is still a pretty good one. Kazuha will always be better to use over her, sure, but you wouldn't be sacrificing all utility in favor of defensiveness. Shielding stonks aren't as high as they were pre-Fontaine, sure, but there is still absolutely a place for them, and the usefulness of shielders is a completely player-dependent thing. Also, we already have so many Animo healers. Jean, Sayu, Xian, Yun, we're all set in that regard. Anymore, while they would end up being good simply because our beloved Lady Farina exists, would end up just being boring. An Animo shielder is a concept which Hoyo has not touched upon before, so I would not be surprised at all if Friday rolls around and they end up revealing her as such. We've got a ton of 4-star healer options already in general too. Not just the Animo ones. It feels like shields have been neglected for quite a long time now, with Zhongli and Layla being the main noteworthy ones, along with Toma being excellent for Burgeon and Kenichi teams. So more is definitely welcome in my books. I do think that if you've been playing for a long time and if you've collected a large roster of characters, Lan Yan will be pretty useless to you no matter what her kit ends up looking like. It's very difficult to compete with the Animo supports that the game currently has right now, because they're all so freaking good. I mean, shoot dude, Hoyo knows how good Kazuha is. He's been in the meta ever since he came out, and Shilonen couldn't kill him, so instead she joined him. I really wouldn't expect much out of Lan Yan if I were you. I do think that the big 5-stars are really gonna overshadow anything that she might offer. However, that doesn't mean that I think she's some irreparable garbage that will never be used by anyone. If she ends up being anything like what I said, she will be decent. How useful a shielder is, assuming that their shield has some meat to it, is completely dependent on how much the player in question personally appreciates them. I don't think she'll be making as big of a splash as Gaming did either. I seriously don't know what good stuff Hoyo was on when designing that dude's kit. Can I have some too? Because that guy shattered everybody's expectations. He truly is an epic gamer, must be his gaming chair. Fontaine in general was a real fun time. Every character coming out was good at worst and the top of S tier at best. Anyways, he was somewhat of an anomaly. I think Lan Yan is more likely to be on the power level of Yunjin, if not quite a bit higher than her, because she's so much more flexible. So not exactly stonks to the tier of Gaming. However, we're talking better than Yunjin on the whole, possibly. It's definitely easy to forget about her when the Exalted Pyro Archon and the almighty Granny Itzli are coming up. But hey, let's not forget about this patootie. This is a very good design, I'm certainly a fan of it. I don't expect her to eat up too many resources if she ends up being a support as well. Level materials, important talents to 8, slap her on whenever her shield would scale on, then you're good to go. So you're gonna have a chance to give her a spin if you end up picking her from Lantern Rite, assuming that it takes place in 5.3 anyway, but considering how Genshin's been switching around their usual scheduling patterns throughout Notlan, I can see that happening. Give her a spin when she rolls around. I look forward to seeing what she actually ends up doing. I also didn't even speculate about her constellations. Those might end up making her even better than what I'm saying here. It's all just guesswork at the end of the day, but keep your eyes peeled for when she gets revealed, since some nice buffing would be the cherry on top, assuming that my guesswork is actually correct in the first place. 5.3 is definitely shaping up to be the Genshin patch. We got a whole lot happening. Archon's coming out, Crazy Grandmother's coming out, so it's only natural that Lan Yan got a bit overshadowed. I'm not expecting many people to care for her, but if you're somebody who is waiting for her specifically, good on you. I hope her kid ends up doing what you personally want it to. While she won't be my immediate priority, I'll definitely give her a spin when she rolls around. Ultimately, she's a cute animo, and if you know anything about me or my channel, I like me some cute animos. Also, for those of you who aren't in the know yet, I've recently opened up a ZZZ second channel. Go check it out and subscribe if you're interested in some silly, fun ZZZ content. I'll be covering all sorts of things relating to the game over there. Hopefully this video was able to feed you some food for thought regarding what Lan Yan's kid and most ideal teams may end up looking like. This has been Juice, signing out, and as cute as Lan Yan may be, she will never evoke the insane laughter that I experienced when I went online one day and saw this for the first time. Oh my goodness, it was amazing.